All right, on today's podcast, we got Phil Sussman, American Yogi himself, and now retired Army captain. Phil, how you doing today?
Hey, brother. Doing well, man. Good to talk to you.
Yeah. So, fill us in. Who are you, and what do you do?
All right. Well, that's a deep question there, but I will do my
We
best.
got time. Go deep with it.
I guess I'll start where I'm at and work my way back. So I recently medically retired out of the Army after a 10-year career. I spent time on both the special operations side for civil affairs and on the conventional side as a scout. Prior to that, I was an Army contracted photojournalist as well as a freelancer. Um, Prior to that, let's see. I think I took a pretty winding road here. Um, but during all these times where I was in and out of careers and in and out of different jobs within the Army, I found American Yogi after breaking my back in a training accident. And yoga is a thing that saved my life, and that's really all the experience that I've had. Whether it's from my training in writing or training with photography or in yoga or the military or survival, all kind of came together to help drive the mission of American Yogi, which is where we are now.
Awesome. So, take us back. Like, where'd you grow up at? What's the background story as far as where you grew up, how you end up in the Army?
Yeah, so I'm a Florida boy actually. So spent the first half of my life down there, and then went off to school up in Boston and worked out in Washington. Kind of crisscrossed around the country quite a bit. I think we were at Benning, out of Carson, and I finished up at Bragg. So bounced around quite a bit, and we're heading back to kind of base operations for American Yogi down in Florida.
Really? So, what made you join the Army?
I think it was something that I'd always wanted to do. I don't think it was ever really a question for me. It was more a matter of when. When I was growing up, though, the drive my family was, you can make the decisions that you'd like to make. Once you get your degree, and that way, if you decide that you want to do something without it, you do something without it. But if you find you need it, you have it. So for me, the focus of my family was to go to college. But in the back of my head, I always wanted to be in the Army. When I was in college, I found photojournalism, went overseas, ended up covering a little bit of war in the Middle East, really as a college student still. Came home, decided that's what I wanted to do for my life, and started taking photos, for wire services and newspapers and getting my game up, and try to get in with Army Times. It didn't necessarily work out. Then started working for the Army as a contractor, and then finally started to be where I wanted to be. And I realized after all that time that what I really wanted to do was to be the one on the other side of the camera, the one actually, helping, orchestrate or curate history rather than being the one that's recording it. So that it was a pretty easy choice for me at that point. I left my job up at Fort Lewis, um, and then moved back to Florida, found a commissioning program, and joined.
Wow. So, what kind of tours did you do with the photojournalism? Like, where were you at? Where were you shooting?
So I was only overseas once as a photojournalist. I worked for a small photo agency in Jerusalem,
Hmm.
actually, and spent a lot of time around Gaza and inside the West Bank. And then when they went to war with Hezbollah up north in southern Lebanon, northern Israel, we just hopped in a car and drove and covered it. But that was the one time the I got invited a second and third time to Iraq and Afghanistan, but really because of my job, where I was, and my responsibilities, I wasn't able to go as a photojournalist. And that was also kind of what pushed me to join the Army. Is I wanted to be overseas. I wanted to be doing things that I felt mattered, and I felt that were important. And I didn't feel I was going to do it where I was doing what I was doing.
Right. And how was that? So, were you in some intense environments? Obviously they're going to war with Hezbollah. Were as a photographer, were you in some, like, when you say this, I
Oh
kind of
yeah,
imagine what you see on the news, and obviously, like, so were you in the thick of it even as a photographer, and how were you protected?
yeah. So I was an idiot. I was an 18-year-old kid, and maybe 19 or 20. I was pretty young. Either way, I didn't really know what I was doing, and it sort of came down. We were outside of Gaza one day, and the Israeli army was building up. I think they had like dozens and dozens and dozens of tanks and infantry out there, and we're getting ready for them to watch them breach into Gaza. And as we're there, because there was a soldier that was kidnapped, and as we were there covering that story, it was just me and another photojournalist. We heard that there was an attack up north, and that's when the soldiers were killed and captured up at the border.
Mm.
So we went back into Jerusalem, and we talked and realized we needed to get, the boss of the agency realized we needed to get some guys up to cover the war or what was starting to develop. And then a couple days later, I was up north with two different photographers that had agreed to take me along with them. And I had no body armor, I had no helmet, no weapon, no nothing. But we're passing by tanks and we're passing by armored personnel carriers and we're passing by fields that are on fire from Katyusha rockets. And we get to some of the border towns, and we're just starting to assess damage and trying to better understand the situation. And all of a sudden, my buddy that I was with the other photographer, he always kept one earpiece in his ear with Army radio, and he looked at me and he said, do you want to go see a firefighter? I think he said a gunfight. I think he said, do you want to go to a gunfight? So I said, sure. Like that's why I'm here. Let's do it. And we got in the car and we drove to the border and ended up being there for the first kind of ground invasion or ground operation of the conflict. And I was absolutely unprotected. I remember running around, kind of looping in and out of the border over there, and there were dudes. There's one of the guys who I think he won a Pulitzer from that exact day, from one of the pictures he took when we were all running around that day. But he was in full body armor, and I had soldiers that were ripping us out of cars and ripping us into different shelters or structures. Because we were woefully unprepared, but we knew it was an important place to be, and we knew it was an important thing to do. So we just went, we stuck it out. First time I was in West Bank, it was the same way. I wanted to go cover. They had like a weekly protest there against the wall that the Israelis were building around the West Bank as a reaction to suicide bombings from years before and attacks from years before. And the first time I went there, we get to this protest site, and there's a couple hundred Palestinians that are walking up this hill to encounter these Israeli police, and I see all the photographers putting on bulletproof vests and putting on helmets and gas masks, and I'm looking around like, does anybody have one for me? And nobody did, because I was just this American kid that came along to try to get some experience. And before I knew it, I was in the middle of it. And it ended okay. I got a little roughed up, but yeah, that was just sort of my experience in Israel. I was just running around gaining as much experience in as many dangerous places as I could.
When and I've not been over there, but I only know what I've seen on TV, and obviously can't believe anything you see on TV. But like, what was the what was the pucker factor, right? Like, because when is this? What time frame are we talking? Like
This was
2000,
2006.
right?
Yeah, so I was 21 actually. Yeah, it was 2006.
So we're seeing like on TV these, like, how did you feel as an American, right? Was there a fear of being like captured as an American over there by some of the Hezbollah or anything like that? Because that always struck out to me like an American being over there just being a
Yeah.
target.
No, that was a huge, huge concern for us. It was something that I'd started to deal with as soon as I got there. I went to the West Bank a few times, got to go to the presidential palace there. It's all Palestinian security, dudes dressed in all black with AKs, walking around our car. I was told not to speak any English, not to speak any Hebrew. I didn't even know any Hebrew or Arabic really at that point. They gave me a name. They said, your name is Khalil, and if anybody talks to you, you can just tell them that. Otherwise, just keep your mouth shut. Um, so that kind of was my introduction to the world of I guess worry about being captured.
So
I'd be attending funerals for settlers that were killed, the days before, and then I'd be in those same places taking pictures. And then when we went up to the border for the war, I've got a video I think somewhere of the photographer that I was with laughing about how they were kidnapping journalists up in the towns where we were. But it just sort of was one of those things we laughed at. It was anybody that's been in the military knows that the only way to get through tough situations is just dark humor.
right.
And that was kind of my first introduction to just laughing it off.
Yeah, maybe it's I'm glad you said that, because I kind of laugh at things sometimes, and when I listen back to myself, that's that, right? I'm kind of like you got to smile at these things that
Oh, you
life
have
throws at
to.
you, man. I was thinking about this morning. I was listening to a different podcast I recorded. I'm like, dude, why are you laughing at that? Like, that's a serious thing. But it's
How
that
you do?
exactly what you said. I just like, man, sometimes you just got to laugh, square
Yeah, I
up to
mean,
it and laugh at it. Like, we'll bring
and
it,
I
man.
had yeah, you're exactly right. Like the funny thing that I think about it, that I guess I've never really thought about it this way, is in the military. You've got dudes that show you how to act in those situations. Like
Hmm.
show you, this is the way you deal with X, Y, or Z. And when I was in Israel, like I didn't have anyone to learn from when it came to that. I was just running on raw emotion, and when it was time to be scared shitless, I was scared shitless. Face buried in the dirt, rockets falling around me. And then there were times when we'd be sitting there and the air siren would go off and we'd look at each other and laugh because if a rocket hit, there'd be 10, 15 people dead right where we were.
Yeah,
So yeah, I think that's just our natural reaction. It's tough to be in that phase I mean, even when you're joking about it, doesn't mean you're not scared, but
sure, yeah.
you can't live in that state.
Right, right. Yes, exactly. The so basically, you were instructed just to blend in, right? Just don't bring attention to yourself as an American. Is that kind of how I understand it?
Yeah, when I was in like the Palestinian territories,
Sure.
yeah, I mean, less blend in, more just be an American that stands out as American, so people don't mess with you. I still got rocks thrown at me. I got yelled at and screamed at and pushed, and like all those things happen. But overwhelmingly, just because I looked very Western, I used to always wear around a baseball hat
Mm,
and a pair of Pumas, and like that was like my uniform for I'm an American journalist, and that mostly kept me safe. At the war, when the war was going on, nobody really cared because everyone was just more concerned with staying alive and fighting than they were the guys that are running around with cameras like idiots.
sure, sure. No. So it wasn't so much hide the fact that you're American. It was don't insult them by trying to speak their language or anything like that.
Yeah, I mean, when I was in the Palestinian
Yeah.
territories, like obviously I mean, I'm an American, but if they think you're Israeli, at the time that I was there, it was a dangerous time
Yeah.
to be rolling around Palestinian territories. So that was I'd say that's more so for that situation, but for the war, it was kind of all bets were off. It's just if it's your time, it's your time. If something's going to happen, it's going to happen. Otherwise, just keep doing your job. So that's what we do. We would sleep wherever we could find shelter at night. The whole north was evacuated, so we were staying in abandoned apartments and kibbutzim and houses and hotels that nobody was using, and just being us.
Yeah.
It was an Israeli and me, an American, just rolling around with a couple cameras.
Wow. Now, how long were you over there for that?
So that wasn't too long actually. I was only there for a few months, but the war itself was only about 34 days. I think it was a pretty short one,
Now,
but it was nonstop.
so so you're doing this. I can't help but to think about your family because you mentioned your family earlier, right? That what they wanted you to go to college. Was there any, other family members that were maybe like in the military or deployed? I know you weren't in the military yet, but what was your family's reaction to you picking up a camera and going in the middle of, a
This
war?
was as far from what they wanted for me as possible, and as far from anything like in my family that any of us had done before. My grandfathers had both served. They were in the Navy during World War II. That was the only military that I had in my family, and um, yeah, there wasn't really much in the way of recklessness until I came along with my camera. And then I would have to send pictures of me in like really safe places and have really calm phone calls with my family while I was over so they wouldn't be worried. And then when I got back, that's when I told them. Um, I think they figured it out when they started seeing the pictures in the newspaper and started seeing them, streaming online. That's when they realized, okay, he's in the middle of it now.
And what was their reaction to that?
Um, I think they were really they were scared for me, but they also knew that there was nothing they could do that was going to sway me one way or the other. I'm very hard headed, so when it comes to something I want to do, I'm going to do it one way or the other, and they understood that, and they knew this was something that I had to do for myself, and really it set off this chain reaction in my life where I just kept chasing this.
Right. Yeah. No, that's awesome. So from there, you wanted to get on the other side of the camera. You enlisted, or you joined the Army, and so you had your degree at this point. So you joined as an officer.
Yeah, so I actually got a second degree. I joined, it was a post-bac program at University of South Florida. So since I already had a degree, they counted half of my degree. And then
Hmm.
instead of waiting for OCS for a couple of years, I decided to just get another bachelor's. So I did a 2-year ROTC program and then joined.
Oh wow, cool. So what was your first job in the Army?
So my first job was a scout platoon leader at Fort Carson, Colorado. I was a heavy platoon leader. So we had Bradleys and Humvees.
And what was the? Did you deploy? Did you deploy throughout your career, or how the rest of your
So
life?
most of my deployments were on the soft. Like I said, I was 2 and 1. So I had two deployments in soft CA and one deployment, which was an area security mission as a platoon leader or as a troop XO. Um, yeah, so it's funny because I used to joke around with my soldiers, my NCOs, are like all the combat or most of the worst situations I ever been in were actually before I joined the army.
Right. Yeah. the So what were some of your biggest takeaways from your service?
Oof, that's a loaded question right there. I think more than anything else, I'd say if I had to take one thing away from it was, when I was younger, all I wanted to do, especially since 9/11 was pivotal in my life. As soon as 9/11 came around, I realized that there was this greater world out there that, this life that I thought was generally pretty low key was actually just this big powder keg,
Hmm.
and I wanted to be part of it. So I just spent years just constantly, watching news and reading books and talking to people and trying my best to get overseas and traveling as much as I could because I just wanted to be out. I just wanted to be experiencing and living and, being on the forefront of history and being in these dangerous situations that challenge me as a man and challenge me as a human. So that's always what I wanted. And then, having experienced those situations and gone through a decade of service that was pretty challenging at a lot of times. That definitely set me on a course where if I didn't find healing, I'd be in a pretty rough place.
Sure.
But I think more than anything else, from all of that, what I realized that what's most important to me is relationships and connections. The people around me, my family, my kids. It's not this war that's thousands of miles away where I find my value. It's in my 3 daughters, my wife,
Right. Right. No,
my
absolutely.
friends.
Yeah. The
That's probably one of my biggest lessons, I'd say.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that's a realization people come to with maturity once they stop chasing things, right? And
Yeah.
they start to realize, the value, like you say, of the relationships around them, finding good relationships, healthy relationships, growth based relationships, things like that. The
Yeah. Now, there was the first person to ever through hike the Appalachian Trail. I always love this quote. Um, he said they asked him why he did it. So he came back from World War II, and ended up through hiking it. And they asked him why he did it, and he said, "Well, I wanted to walk the army off." And I just get that now.
Yeah, yeah.
You're done chasing. You're ready to walk and breathe. And let it go.
No, 100%. So you mentioned earlier, so you broke your back. Is that what got you um, into yoga?
Yeah, that's absolutely what got me into it. It changed the course of my life. Was breaking my back. I was in an armored vehicle. We were just proofing a range in Fort Carson, and I was standing up on the TC seat. So the I'm trying to think what TC stands for right now to break it. It's like truck controller. Fuck, it's been a while. Either way, I was standing on the TC seat of the truck, and I had my feet on the edge of the seat on the very tip top, and I was trying to see a target off in the distance, and my feet slipped, and I crunched my back. My feet went up in the air, crunched my back on the metal seat, and instantly fractured L2, L3 vertebrae, and I was laid out on the floor of that striker. And I lay there for about 20 minutes and then finally got up, finished proofing the range for another couple hours, took a nice, long, bouncy ride back to the
Mm,
cantonment area on post for another couple hours. Finally went to the hospital. They diagnosed it, shoved me full of pain meds, sent me on my way. And I spent a solid, I guess, week or two on the couch, not moving, couldn't even sit up or anything. And then, my wife just catering to me or catering for me. And then I was supposed to go to civil affairs assessment and selection 2 weeks later. So I had to push that off. And I swapped with a buddy. So I went in like 3 months. And I went from not able to move in the slightest to I had a walker and then a cane. And eventually I was walking again. And I started doing physical therapy. And the physical therapist, we started to make progress with me. And I asked him, I said, look, I'm supposed to go to selection here in a couple months. Like, am I okay to start training? And he said, as long as you can take the pain, then go for it. So that's what I did. And I started pushing forward full steam and got my training back and went to selection, came home absolutely wrecked. And, my wife looked at me and she said, you need to do something. I was in a really bad place. I had lost a very, very close friend just a couple months before that. And I was with him when he died. And
Mm.
I'd also lost another NCO who I felt very responsible for. So I was in a rough place mentally and physically.
Now,
And
are these
my
like
wife,
training losses or?
yeah, one was buddy got out of the army, one of my best buddies, and shortly afterwards he got in a motorcycle accident,
Hmm.
and he was in the hospital bed for 24 hours, brain dead, and I was with him for that with our NCOs, and then the other one that was a training accident as well. So I was the lead planner on it though, and it was a nighttime, it was a night maneuver, and there was very little to be done. It just sort of poor circumstances, and a rock came out of somewhere where they couldn't see it from their hatch, and that was it. And then I was on the recovery team for that, so I was very mentally and physically I was pretty banged up.
Hmm.
And so my wife pushed me to yoga. And the first time I went, I felt pretty awkward. And the second time, I still felt kind of awkward. But I kept going because there was something about it that allowed me to actually be present with all the stuff that I wasn't really dealing with, that I was really just trying to push down. But yoga allowed me to really access that. So I was going to yoga. I was meditating quite a bit. I would go to meditation groups. I meditate on my own, and the combination of the two like set me on this path of healing, in ways that I had never thought were possible when I was in the deepest depths of my depression and physical pain. So I stuck with it, and the deeper that my practice became, the more healthy I became mentally and physically, and then I just wanted to spread it to the masses, and it's kind of where we are now.
So, how was it serving you physically, right? So, I guess, tell me a little bit about like you pre yoga, your physical state versus like where yoga took you to maybe where you're, because one, I'm hearing you say like you broke vertebrae in your back and they gave you pain meds and sent you home. Like, was there
Yeah,
nothing else to do? Was that it?
yeah, that was it. They said the way that it broke, they were very, very clean fractures, transverse, so straight across both vertebrae. They said the way that it broke, that the best course of action was not to do surgery, was just to let it heal.
Hmm.
So there was nothing to be done other than just stay off it and then slowly rehab it. Prior to breaking my back, I was great. I was lifting heavy. I was running fast. I was doing all the things that combat arms folks like to do.
Yeah.
We like to be big and strong and mean, and I was doing all those things. And then I broke my back, and I realized that I wasn't invincible, and I actually had to pay attention to my body and my mind and the way I trained. So I went from someone that could throw lots of weight on a bar and throw bars and dumbbells around, and somebody that could sprint with the best of them and run the guys through some brutal PT, to somebody that needed three guys to lift them off the ground after a long ruck,
Yeah.
or that's somebody that couldn't sleep through the night because I'm constantly waking up in pain.
Yeah.
But what I found was that I had to do a couple things. One was change my idea of what being healthy and working out meant to me. In the past, the idea of being fit was being big, was being like big and muscular. But now, these years later of dealing with these just persistent chronic injury, chronic pain and injuries, what I've realized to me is that being fit, being healthy is just looks totally different. Like it's not about being absolutely yoked right now for me. It's about feeling good in my body and making sure that I'm doing things that help my mobility and help me decrease pain, but also still help me feel strong. So instead of maybe throwing 300 pounds on a bench, I'll throw my body weight on there.
Mm.
I'll throw just above body weight, and that's a couple times a week, enough to keep the tendonitis on my shoulder kind of at bay, and keep me feeling strong. But yoga is to me is the ultimate kind of fusion between what we need for our bodies and what we need for our minds together.
Yeah, no, well, I think someone had told me that, I don't know if you had heard this or know this to be true too, like that yoga came about by way of folks trying to meditate longer, right? They were doing yoga.
Yep.
So, yeah. So I thought that was pretty
Yeah.
interesting.
Yeah. It really, they would start with yoga so they could meditate for hours and hours on end.
Right.
So like to me, yoga sort of for me starts, there's 8 limbs of yoga, and one of those limbs is asana, so the physical practice. So the rest of yoga is I mean, we could go through a whole class on it, but I'll suffice it to say that involves concentration and meditation and cleanliness and all these things. And so where someone may look at the physical practice of yoga being the start and finish of it, for me, the practice really starts when I can finally let go. After the physical practice is over, and I can either lay there or sit there and be at peace, and find some nice cleansing breath that fills me up from head to toe. Like that's the yoga. That's the part that really defines the practice for me.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's worth exploring, right? Because I like I told you in the green room, I'm coming to this conversation like I do. I do what Peloton tells me is yoga, right? Because when
Yeah.
COVID hit, I had never done yoga before, but I do jujitsu, and I knew like I needed to increase my mobility. Like I can't touch my toes, I couldn't. I just knew I wasn't stretching.
Yeah.
I knew I work out to improve my jujitsu now. That's my focus. Like I used to run marathons and stuff like that, but now I'm kind of like, since getting bit by that bug, everything I do physically as far as my exercise, like how is it going to contribute? And mobility is a big thing. So when COVID
Yeah.
hit, I was like, okay, let me work some of this yoga in. I got it on the app, not going anywhere. So I started working it. But that's all I know. So when you say like there's 8 limbs of yoga, and not that we need to go through the whole class, but what do you mean? Like there's more to yoga than just downward dog is what you're telling me.
Yeah, what I'll also say too is that there's all different. You could be practicing the same type of yoga. So, like, let's say for example, you go to a vinyasa yoga teacher, so you'll be doing like they call it flows.
Mm-hmm.
It's a sequence that you do that you'll continue to do throughout class. It involves kind of like a half push up position, pushing up into like they call it cobra, or like an up dog. It stretches out your upper body. Um, you could go to 2 teachers that were trained by the exact same teacher, the same instructor, and they're given 2 totally, as far as the details of the class, if you read it online, the details of the class would be the same, but you could walk into both of those classes and have completely separate experiences. Like they could be 180 from each other. One could be very slow and methodical and gentle, and the other one could be like really hard and fast and loud music. And so even within the same discipline, the same types of yoga, you're going to find totally different types of classes, totally different types of teachers. Like for me, when I, as a teacher, I spend weeks and weeks and weeks on my playlists. And then, when I'm in class, I give people I call them Dharma talks, or, soul talks, or I like to give a piece of my own self work to my class at the same time, where it's hotter than hell in there. Which is different than the class they might take an hour before I get in the room. So, but then if you want to expand it even more into the 8 limbs of yoga, so you've got like the yamas and the niyamas. So like kind of your restraints or your disciplines, and then your duties and observances. Then you have the asana, which is your postures and the movement. Pranayama, breathing techniques. There's other ones like withdrawal and concentration and meditation and enlightenment. They all play into the larger sense of yoga. So I guess an important distinction is to make that, when we think of yoga in the West, we think of the movement, but really it's everything.
Yeah, no, that's interesting. With regard to your wife got you into it. Now, was she just a participant, or was she more than that? Was she an instructor or teacher too, as well?
Yeah, so yes, not an instructor. She just was a really I don't know, heavy practitioner.
Mm.
She enjoyed it quite a bit. She did it, everywhere we lived. That she was into it, and I just always resisted it for years. Um, and then once she pushed me into it, that's when I sort of took over as the yogi in the family. And then I only went to yoga teacher training really because I wanted because I wanted to understand yoga better. Especially being American yogi, I wanted to understand yoga deeply, but I didn't ever really have an intention of teaching. But I got my certification right before I went to Syria last year. I guess it was a year and a half ago at this point, and I ended up teaching yoga on the roof of our team house for a few months, and came home and decided, well, I guess I'm a yoga teacher now, and started teaching in the studio. And that was it. Now my wife, with the kids and with work and everything, she doesn't even practice that much anymore, and I try to get on the mat as much as I can.
So physically, walk me through like what did it do for you, right? So like you were immobile, it sounds like, or at least in a lot of pain. What did
Yeah.
yoga do for you for your recovery?
So I'd say I would actually say I'm probably still in recovery. This many years later, and that yoga is just a part of just my daily routine that just needs to happen now in order to continue to recover from the lingering effects from that injury. For the let's see, I think it's 2021 now, so 6 years later, I'm still dealing with nerve damage. I've got sciatica. I've got arthritis in my back. I've got a herniated disc. I've got arthritis in my neck. I've got growths on my femurs. I've got tears in both my hamstrings. Arthritis in my knees. And that's just the muscle and bone part. And then inside, I've got post traumatic stress and anxiety, depression, tendonitis, and just about every my shoulders and my knees, and trying to think what else I got going on. I got a lot of stuff. I'll put it that way. And yoga allowed me to. I mean, people say mobility like it's like it's kind of a buzzword, but it's true. Really, what yoga on the outside helps me be mobile. It helps me be able to go through a normal day that somebody without injury or somebody without any sort of significant trauma on their bodies wouldn't think twice about. But me with with like every ailment that I have, I need to be very conscious about making sure that my body's getting the sort of stretching, the sort of attention that it needs in the way that it needs, so that I can live really a normal functioning life to get up to that baseline. So, yoga really for me, it just helps me stay in the fight, stay in the game, and be able to lift my daughters in the morning or get out of bed without my wife having to come around the bed and lift me out of it, which we've had plenty of times.
Yeah, I would want to relate to say that was kind of my experience too, right? Like, so doing jujitsu, it's hard on the body, especially me. I walk around, I'm a lightweight, so I'm always the lightest dude on the mat. So I'm facing some monsters, and my training partner here, he outweighs me by a good bit, and he's super fit and strong, and he's a freaking brown belt, so he's got years on me. So I'm just getting mashed, going to work,
Yeah.
and it's hard on the body. And so I would have these weird injuries, and I'm going to the doctors, and they don't know what's wrong. And so I've had like the shoulder issue for a long time, and the doctors couldn't tell me what was wrong. And then so last year or whatever it was through COVID, yeah, I remember like so I started doing the yoga, and one day like it was at the one of the classes, like the dude threw this weird, standing, stretch. I wouldn't know what it was called if I wanted to, but
Yeah.
I'm kind of like standing, kind of spread leg, and I'm trying to reach my opposite shoulder to my opposite knee and kind of making this square. And man, I just felt this relief in that shoulder
Yeah.
area. And it was almost like what I tell myself is like my problem was muscular. I probably just, strained a muscle that kind of just seized up under my shoulder blade. And then yoga, I found this stretch that I could relieve it. And the more I did that
Yeah.
stretch, the more the shoulder like got right and went away. And Now I'm pretty much like it's gone. And here I spent a significant amount of time, a significant amount of appointments trying to talk to doctors about what was wrong, and they couldn't figure it out. And here I am, I just doing a freaking stupid 20-minute yoga session, and boom, there's the solution. And that's what really turned me on to it. I'm like, okay, now this is more than mobility. Now it's solving problems for me.
It's quality of life.
Yeah. So I can relate to exactly what you're saying, and I think that's why I enjoy it now. Is just kind of, again, it's helping me with my mobility, but to your point, right? It's getting me back to that baseline, because I know when I don't do it, that whatever's going on in my shoulder or under my shoulder blade
Oh
kind of,
yeah.
it starts to like seize back up. So I'll probably never know what really the true problem is. I have to put it in my will and tell my wife, like, hey, when I'm dead and gone, like, cut me open, tell me, figure out what was wrong with my
Yeah,
shoulder.
figure it out.
but, but I all I know is I got to do that yoga stretch and
Yeah,
keep
I
it
mean,
square.
it's funny. I had a very similar conversation with someone a little while ago, and it was their shoulder as well. That like years and years couldn't figure out what was going on with the shoulder. Like finally tried yoga, and then all of a sudden, oh shit, like it feels better. And what I always think about when I hear stories like that, and a lot of us who found yoga, and you could listen to this podcast or other podcasts and think, well, I'm not messed up. I don't need yoga. Like my body's not messed up, but that I wish that I had started practicing yoga before my body was messed up.
Mm.
Like the little prehab for the body, other than using it as rehab. Because everything. You talk to a lot of people that find yoga, and a lot of times it'll come from a place of, well, my body was starting to break down, or I, was recovering from this injury, or I was just in a really hard place mentally, and yoga brings people back up, and can bring people back up, I should say. But if I had started it even earlier, maybe, or let's say, for example, with your shoulder, like say you started it earlier, maybe that problem never would have developed in,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
while you were rolling,
Right.
if you had been doing it for years. That's something I think about.
Yeah, I agree. And um, it's one of the, and it is, it's preventative, and so is strength training, right? Like I talked to a
Absolutely.
lady, and she's a friend of mine. She's in the area, and she's well into her 70s, maybe even 80s now. And she ran across the Himalayas. Like she did some serious running, and I was talking to her about running years ago and working up for a long run or whatever. And she goes, get in the weight room. I'm like, what? Like I was asking her,
Yeah.
like, hey, how should I structure my running workouts or whatever? And she's like, get in the weight room. She's like, when's the race? And I told her, and she's like, get in the weight room. I'm like, really? And she's like, you got to strengthen your legs to avoid injury, right? And I think yoga
Yeah, for
similarly,
sure.
right? Like increasing that mobility decreases your injury probability, right?
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with that. I think I've been going through physical therapy. I just finished it up. I was doing physical therapy for about 8 months straight, twice a week, and it was for my shoulders, for my back, for my hips, like all the major areas. And I think if I would have just done physical therapy, it would have been okay. If I would have just done yoga, it would have been okay. But together, and then you add the mindfulness aspect where you're actually, sending, those thoughts into your body, which is affecting how your body's healing. It's like that's all this amalgamation of healing for yourself. So I think it all plays into it.
Yeah, definitely. So walk me through that part of it for a minute, like the mindfulness. When you say, sending the thoughts into your body, what do you mean by that?
Yeah, for sure. So mindfulness is another one of those words that people, I was doing a retreat down in Destin with AFSOC a little while ago, and one of the guys was telling me, he said, mindfulness is kind of a buzzword now. I said, I hadn't heard that, but it makes sense. It's kind of it's an easy enough word to throw around and be like, yeah, we just need to be mindful. Okay, cool. Well, what does that mean? Well, being mindful is I mean, it's an understanding of what it is you're doing and why you're doing it is kind of why. It's probably an easy way to describe it. So let's say, for example, you're having a tough day, and you find that you don't realize you're having a tough day until you all of a sudden realize that you have been on your phone mindlessly searching social media for 6 out of the 10 hours that you've been awake, or you've been just distracting yourself with, I don't know, X, Y, or Z, pick something. And you've been doing that to take your mind off of the things that you need to deal with, whether it's consciously or subconsciously. I find myself doing it all the time. If I find myself scrolling too much on the phone at things that are, unimportant to me at this moment, then I will make the conscious or the mindful decision to put my phone down and make sure that I need to focus on the task at hand with 100% of the concentration that I have to give it. Um, it can be as simple as, mindful about the things that you eat, the things that you put into your body. How much are you drinking at night? Are you just throwing bottles back, or are you just pouring shots, or are you, if you want to have a glass of wine or you want to have a glass of whiskey, you're mindful of, how much you're having. When it comes to the body, a lot of times we discount how much an effect that our mind can have on our healing, on our mental health, on our really just our overall health as humans. But I had a buddy who died a few years ago that he's the one that really sold me on this. And this is before I was even into yoga and meditation and mindfulness, just the power of thought, the power of positive thought, and how it can affect your healing. And so I tried it and tried it with my wife. And I felt that the more positive I was about things, the more optimistic that I was about things, even if it was forced sometimes, that it would help my recovery. And with yoga, what it does, it allows you to focus, and meditation allows you to be mindful of where you are in this moment in time. They say that the past is a made up concept, and the future is a made up concept as well. All we have is right now. And if we're not fully immersed in right now, then we're going to lose the time. We're going to lose the potential health that we have to things that we do and actions that we take that we did without thinking about it. But then when you take that applied thought, that positive, it doesn't even have to be positive, but at least concentrated and focused thinking, then you can truly transform your mind, and then in turn your body. That what they say, there was a study done a few years ago, and it was done on monks that meditated versus the average person that doesn't meditate. And they applied different stressors, and they wanted to see if there was a difference in the mind of someone that had a deep meditation practice versus the stress response in a mind that didn't have a meditation practice. And what they found was that those who meditated actually had a different chemical response within their brains than those who didn't meditate, and that their stress response was lower and didn't last as long as those who didn't meditate. So for me, like when I started meditating and I started working on mindfulness and concentration, that's what I needed. I needed someone to tell me those the data points that would convince me that what this practice is actually is legit. And then the more I dove into it myself, I'm proof positive that it works.
I never forget. I often think about this, but because this is yoga and meditation for me. I've added to my game over this last year, and I agree. It's actually a part of. I won't say it's a part of my workout routine. It kind of is, but it's definitely integrated in my routine, just like working out. I guess that's a better way of putting it,
Mm-hmm.
because it does serve. And I guess I remember back in the day. You remember we used to have health class back in like high school and stuff.
Yeah,
Uh,
yeah.
I remember I was in health class in like the ninth grade, and one of the students was talking to our health teacher, this old guy, and he was like, it was a perfect like 13-year-old question. It was something like the teacher's name was Mr. Pope. It's like, Mr. Pope, I don't all these animals, they've got cool things like claws and big teeth, and why we don't have any of that? Why not? And the teacher looked at him, he points at his head and he's tapping his forehead. He's like, we got this.
Hell
And he
yeah.
was saying, and he was talking, I was talking about our brain, and that's what, I guess the realization is, as I've gotten more into this, is like your mind, like meditation as an example, is exercise for your mind, and really controlling, like you said, your emotions, your awareness, your intentions,
Exactly.
that those elements of our, I guess I'll say, being, or they need practice, right? Or otherwise we're just reacting to it.
Muscle,
It's,
right?
it's
Yeah.
equivalent of like just never, doing a bench press and someone throws you on the bench, man, you're going to go out quick. You just,
Yeah. If somebody's like, it's like, well, what's going to happen when you're in a dangerous situation, or like, you're going to be able to control yourself, or keep stressed down, and like, yeah, when the time comes, I'll be fine. I'll be fine. But if you've never actually practiced that, then how would you ever know?
sure.
I went to so when I was overseas the first time, I was scared shitless. Like I was constantly scared I was going to die. I mean, I never had that like, oh, I saw my life flash before my head, before my eyes, but I watched rockets fall before my eyes where I thought this was going to be it. And I was absolutely beyond scared. I mean, I still did my job, but it got to me. Then years later, in the Army, when I was put in similar situations, what I had found was that same deep seated fear that I had at 21 years old, the first time I went to war, was gone. It wasn't that I wasn't scared, but it was that it wasn't controlling me. It was more a data point. And it's like, well, this is a dangerous situation. Okay, well, what do you need to do right now? And I 100% attribute that to my meditation and yoga practice for sure.
Yeah, it's a tool, you know what I mean? I think it's a tool that you can call on. I mean, at my early stages of exploring it and learning it, and that's why I love this conversation because I'm there. I'm at the beginnings of just trying to figure it out. And so I've got a lot of
The
curiosity
best
around it.
place to be, man.
Yeah, but I know like I was talking to someone before about just just walking with my wife in the morning and we get up early and by 4:30 we're out doing a walk. And what I do now, I actually get up in at 4 and I go downstairs and I do like a 20-minute meditation, and then I'll come up and her and I will go for a walk. Well, since meditating, like I catch myself not being present with her, right? So if we're walking and my mind starts to wander, now it's like, hey man, you're not paying attention, and you kind of bring it back. So just like when you're meditating, at least what I do is like, on the guided, like it's telling you to, focus on your breath or whatever. Like I literally, like one day I remember when I caught myself and like focus on your breath and it kind of brought it back
Yeah,
just like I had practiced in my meditation. And I was like, hey man, cool. So and it sounds like one of those silly little woo woo things, but I had a tool now, just to kind of
exactly.
pull my brain back to, like you said, the present, right? Instead of being off in the future, like the rest of my day, the stresses
Because
that were
gone
not
to it.
even there yet, right? They were in this imagined future that I was living in my head. But meanwhile, I'm wasting time, intended to be, quality time with my wife every day.
Exactly.
So
And because when you're not conscious, when you're not, mindful about that time, then you could lose it, and then you're not being present. It's like going for a drive and then forgetting you just missed the last 20 minutes. You don't even remember driving.
but yeah, how often does that happen to people today? I mean, I
I'm
mean,
sure
no
constantly.
one's driving anymore, but
Yeah.
back when we did.
Yeah. And there's a book I read. It's actually like my favorite book. It's called Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And it's this like amalgamation of talks by this Buddhist monk. And the idea is that in the beginner's mind there's possibility and there's options, there's flexibility and adaptability, but in the expert's mind or the someone who's got years and years of experience, that same opportunity isn't necessarily there. They're more closed-minded to things, not as open to new ideas and new techniques and criticism and people challenging and questioning. So that's why being a beginner in this practice, whether it's yoga, meditation, mindfulness, even your meditation can just be taking a breath when you get up in the morning. Single breath could be your meditation. All these things, like being at the forefront of it, being at the beginning of it, is an awesome time because you know you're molding your mind, and you're molding it exactly how you want to mold it. And you're open, from a variety of different sources, and whether it's people you talk to or things you read or classes you take. So I think where you're at sounds like spot on, man.
Yeah, and I think, look, you're talking a little bit about ego too, which is something else we got to get in check. I mean, like when you think you know it all, and that ego is just kind of screaming like you got it all figured out, man. You know,
Yeah, ego. I think I spent. So I usually like to spend. I take a year and I say, all right, this is what I'm going to work on this year. And when I was in the army, I used to take things that I would hear from my bosses, like in my yearly evaluation. And if there was something they were saying I could work on that I agreed with, then I would be very conscious of that as time went on. And if I catch myself, I try to correct the behavior. And it's the same way. It's the same way with this. When it comes to, I just lost my train of thought. Hold on, get me back onto it real quick.
focus on your breath.
Focus on the breath. You're focusing on the breath. I was so present and I forgot what I was going to say a second from now.
You were
Man,
talking
I'm
about
sorry.
your evals. I mentioned
Oh,
ego.
the ego.
Yeah.
Okay, perfect. Okay. So thank you. So then I spent, I guess, last year or so working on putting my ego aside, and ego, a lot of times people hear the word ego, they think of it as a bad thing. Your ego is bad. Well, your ego is not necessarily bad. The ego is your sense of self. So, what makes it tough is when people challenge your ego or challenge, your sense of self and how you react to it. Well, if somebody challenges it and they say, why don't you try either being more this way or try this new thing or that new thing or incorporating this into your life. It can be a challenge to your ego and your view of yourself that maybe, okay, well, maybe I'm not enough the way I am, or maybe I am enough, but I could, be living a more fulfilling life, or I could be kinder to people, or I could be more present with my family, with my wife, my kids, for example. So all of those things, like that all encompasses your ego. It's really just the way that you are. Do you allow it to be questioned? Can you put your ego to the side so you can learn and grow? That's, I tell people all the time, stepping into the yoga studio is one of the most humbling experiences that you can have as a, for anybody. But, when I first started going, or, I'll talk to people all the time and they'll be in the, late 20s, 30s, 40s. And the first time they ever set foot in the yoga studio, to do something when you're an adult and you do something for the first time and you're not good at it right away, which is yoga mostly, because the not being not good at it, but not being familiar with it in yoga, it's humbling because you're surrounded by people that maybe some of them know more what they're doing than you, and you feel like a beginner, and makes you just not feel like this big barrel chested person. But there's also the other side of that is you're opening yourself up. You're allowing yourself to grow. You're allowing yourself to evolve and change and experience these new things. And then in the end, rather than not letting your ego be challenged, you're even stronger. Your sense of self and identity and presence is so much stronger that had you blocked it out, had you not given yourself the opportunity, you'd be 3 steps backwards.
Sure. Yeah, it's to your detriment. Absolutely.
Absolutely. But once we get past that and we say, okay, it's okay for me to go to yoga in a room that could be primarily women. It's okay where if I'm in class and I feel like I want to cry, like to cry, to let it out. It's okay to go seek professional help when I'm in a bad place mentally. All these things they're only not okay when we let our ego get in the way of it. But we can put our ego to the side and say, it doesn't make me any less of a person. It's just me using tools. My tool right now is my counselor or my therapist. My tool right now is the gym or rock climbing or running or whatever it could be. It could be walking. Um, but once we put that ego to the side, the world is open to us and growth is open to us.
And I would say people honor that. Like for example, like the guy having the courage to go to a yoga class full of women for the first time with the intention to be the beginner that he is, to get the benefit of it. The women in that class will actually respect that. They'll respect the courage to come out and do that. You know what I mean? So as far as the anxiety you
Oh,
feel, it's all for naught,
yeah.
because they would actually, honor and respect that you're coming in to, do something that they obviously enjoy. And if you're doing it humbly, they'll have mad respect for that.
Oh, that's absolutely accurate. I don't think that I've ever walked into a yoga studio that didn't feel completely, one of a place of acceptance. There's no judgment in the yoga studio. That's what I love about it. That's it. You can be who you are and experience, this human condition that we're all going through, in a community, in a tribe, and nobody looks at you sideways for what you're wearing or what you're practicing on or how well you can stretch a certain way or bend your body or achieve a posture. None of that really matters. What matters is that you're showing up honestly and genuinely.
Right.
And
Yeah.
people respect that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. 100%. So how would you recommend one get started in yoga?
I'd say it really depends on where you're at. For me, the easiest thing to do was just to jump into it, was to just find a studio and start taking classes and try different teachers out and different types of classes and figure out what I liked. And even what I like now is different than what I liked, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So that's going to constantly evolve. Some people feel more comfortable doing it in their house. And in that case, there's live classes you can take online, streaming from studios. You can take, there's free classes from a variety of sources on our website. We actually, when I was deployed a few years ago and I needed to do some yoga and I didn't know exactly where. So I wanted to provide that same resource to anybody that was in the same circumstance later on. So we started producing classes.
Hmm.
So we have classes on our website. So if you're, not ready to walk into a yoga studio yet, you can hop on the computer and press play on a class and do a 30 minute flow and call it good and do that a few times. Or, research the, basic yoga poses on YouTube and get yourself familiar with them, and then go into a studio and go to a class and have, a trained teacher guide you through it. And then it doesn't feel so foreign. So it's really like, it's really what your best learning style is. For me, I like blunt force trauma. So I just needed to throw myself into it. And my home practice isn't as strong as my studio practice because I tend to not be as motivated to do it in the house. But, if I put my yoga uniform on, a pair of silkies and a tank top, and I drive to the studio and I'm in it. But if I try to motivate myself at the house, sometimes I'm not as successful. So, but if you're trying to get into it, doing it from the house is a good way to start. You don't have to worry about how anyone's going to see you, and you can get familiar with it at your pace. And then I recommend to everyone to go do it with people somewhere in some way, shape, or form. There's an energy exchange there that's unparalleled.
Mm. Yeah, that's interesting. What kind of, so when folks are out there and they're looking at different types of classes and stuff, what are they going to see? Like, and why would they go to one type? Because I know, for example, like, and even you mentioned earlier, like the room being hot, like hot yoga versus
Yeah.
different, like what kinds are there, and why would one like pick a different type?
Yeah. So I'd say first off, if you find a studio that looks interesting to you, looks like one you'd want to try, I would say go to talk to like, management there, talk to the owner, talk to teachers. A lot of studios, they have a lot of different names for their classes. Like we're in the process of moving now, and I'm looking up studios, and I started looking at classes, and I don't really even understand what all the classes are because every studio has like their own take on certain classes. So, but generally though, you're going to have heated or unheated. You're going to have vinyasa classes like I talked about a little earlier, or maybe it's a yin class. For the yin yoga, you'll find a lot of deep stretching, long, like 3 to 5 minute holds. You'll find they have hot holds classes and regular holds classes where you're not necessarily doing the whole vinyasa flow. I recommend Googling it if you're curious about vinyasa. That's what I teach. But then I'd say talking to the studio and saying like, this is where I'm at. This is what I'm interested in. There's some people that have been practicing yoga for like 20 years and they don't do hot classes. They just don't like them. There's some people that, like me, I pretty much exclusively do hot classes. Because I was a wrestler for about 6-7 years, and I loved cutting weight. I loved being in the wrestling room, sweating my ass off in a bunch of sweats, and with the music blasting and just being absolutely physical. So that's how I teach my classes, and that's the classes I like to go to. But if you go to a studio and you just you tell the owner or tell a teacher there, whoever's working the desk, this is what I'm into. Looking for, I'm new to yoga. Maybe I want something, a beginner's class. If some studios have classes that are solely like beginner foundations classes, there's classes that are all levels classes. There's advanced, which is you'd find more inversions, like handstands and arm balances and stuff. I personally don't do any of that. But there's essentially everything that you're looking for, whatever you might be looking for in both your body and your mind. There's most likely going to be a class for that. So start with hot versus not hot, and then kind of go from there. Like, do you want kind of gentle stretching? Do you want vigorous movement? And then figure out from teacher to teacher who you vibe with. Because at the end of the day, for me, it's all about the teacher. If I feel very in tune with that teacher that's guiding me, well, then I'll come to every class.
Right. Yeah. No, and that's important, right? Because you're only going to have what you have available to you as well. I mean, certainly searching
Yeah.
online, but if you're trying to go to a live experience, you got to probably limited to
Yeah.
what's around you.
And I also don't want to put like bounds on it to say like you have to do it in a studio, you have to do like a formal home practice.
Right.
When I get up in the morning, I just have a set of simple stretches that I do. That's yoga, and it just takes me like 5 minutes. I have a gratitude practice when I wake up in the morning before I touch my phone. I take some breaths and I find 3 things that I'm grateful for the day. That's all yoga. So it doesn't have to be this real like formal, rigid process. Like as you go throughout your day, You can be doing yoga as you're driving, as you're washing dishes, as you're having conversation with someone. It's
And
all different
are
aspects.
you using yoga in that context synonymous with the meditation aspect of it as well?
I, not necessarily synonymous, but that's an aspect to it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So like with meditation as an example, aside from the physical aspect of yoga, someone interested in starting meditating or things like that, kind of what would you recommend?
That's a good question. I get that one quite a bit. And usually it starts with, well, I can't meditate. That's what people tell me. And I always squash that as soon as I hear that from people because absolutely everyone can meditate. People say, "Oh, but my mind wanders too much. I can't stop thinking." And I was like, "Well, that's natural. That's what the mind does. It thinks. So you're not doing anything wrong. It's just a matter of training your mind." So for meditation, there's there's a multitude of ways to meditate. You can meditate in silence. Just breathe. You can meditate to music. You can do guided meditations. There's body scan meditations. You can Google John Kabat-Zinn. There's amazing body scan meditations. You can do candle meditations or incense where you watch the flame or you watch the smoke. You can do meditations where you count your breaths in and out. Maybe you count the length of your breath in and out. There's so many different ways to do it. When I was at this retreat a couple of weeks ago, I had people tell me like, we've never meditated before, but we're interested in it. Can you help us? And they said, I've never sat down. I've never meditated for more than 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever. I just can't do it. And I said, it's not about turning off your mind. You're never going to stop thought. It's always going to be there. It's a matter of recognizing it, observing it, and then setting it aside. So I went from talking about meditation and then guiding this group of people that told me they couldn't meditate through 40 minutes meditation. But it's possible. You just have to find what works for you. And, there's one thing that works one day may not be the thing that works the next day either. Maybe one day, music may hit the spot for me, but the next day I just need somebody to guide me through with words.
Yeah, I think back to what you were saying earlier, right? There's a reason it's called a practice, and you got to have the humility to kind of to practice. You're not going to get it the first time. It's not going to be maybe what you think it's going to be. Just like you got your first class of yoga, even meditation, like the first time's going to be tough, but that's a part of it. Like going through it and
Exactly.
breaking down those it's a practice. It's back to like we said earlier. It's exercise for your mind. So again, it's like your first time on the bench or your first run or whatever. Like, yeah, it's not going to be
Exactly.
pretty. It's not going to be
Yeah.
pretty. But that's
That,
where
that's what makes it fun to me.
that's where that perseverance has got to come in. And go, yeah,
Yep.
well, that didn't go the way I wanted it to, but hey, back at it
Exactly.
tomorrow.
That's it. I remember I started fly fishing a few years ago and I was terrible. I couldn't tie a fly, I couldn't catch a fish, but I loved how hard it was. I loved how difficult and how you had to be, perfect with your impeccable with your casting. And you had to truly have patience when you were tying a fly onto this little tiny line. Like all these things that I found really, really difficult. I also loved it because they were so difficult and I could continually get better. And I knew I was never going to be an expert. I was never going to, master it. And that's what keeps me interested in it. And yoga, even if I do the same postures every single day for the rest of my life, I will have a different experience just about every single day. And that's what makes it interesting.
Yeah, no, 100%. So talk to me about what you're doing now. What is American Yogi?
So American Yogi, well, we started as a t-shirt company. That was our idea, but it really didn't take long for what started as a t-shirt company to really become sort of a movement, a community. And we are this international group of individuals that want to heal. That want to live life mindfully and live life in a way that that helps ourselves and helps those around us and makes this society, these communities better places because we're doing the work to heal. So with this community, what are we doing? Well, we have, obviously our online platforms, our website and our classes and our social media where, we talk a lot about just the things that everyone deals with. And, here's, ways to maybe deal with them, or here's basically sometimes even just saying you're not alone in what you're going through. So we're going to continue to, foster that community. We'll continue to produce apparel that people connect with and help them feel like part of this tribe. We have our first retreat actually in Guatemala in January. and we're going to continue to do retreats. It's going to be like a surf wellness retreat. Really good buddy Andy Manzi, who started Warrior Surf Foundation, just moved down there, and he's running that retreat with us. Hopefully, some more partnerships with other amazing veterans organizations that are out there. Advocacy. We'd like to maybe continue the retreats stateside. So the the idea of American Yogi is constantly evolving, and that's what's really exciting for us. And what we really love about it is that we think we want to take it a certain way, and then the community guides us another way, and we're totally open to that. But now I'll be able to focus, or we're bringing the team together down in Florida now that I'll be out, so I can have a greater hand in it. Is just all hands on deck towards growing this brand as big and widespread as we can, and helping other people find themselves.
Yeah, no, I think it's totally awesome. And I love the part that you hit on, like the you're not alone. Because I think in that regard, we're two soldiers in the good fight, right? Like I think a lot of people are dealing with a lot of like mental social anxiety needlessly because they think it's just them. They think like,
Yeah.
oh, my problems are unique to me. No one else, everyone else has got it all figured out. What's wrong with me? But man, it's so not true. Like it's
Yeah.
and that's what I enjoy kind of saying, no, man, we all have it. It's something we're all dealing with something, and
Yeah. We just want to be seen, right? Just want to be somebody seeing you and acknowledging you and the things that you're going through. Like it's validating. It makes you feel like, all right, I'm all right because I'm not alone here. Like homie gets it, and if he gets it, that means that he gets me. And if somebody gets me, I'm not alone in this fight. I have somebody I can reach out to, and that alone that's comfort.
yeah, 100%. And it's reassuring for those that hear it, and it's a relief, to kind of know
Yeah.
that like you said, you're not alone, and finding other people that you can relate to or have been there or whatever, is a godsend, to a degree. It's a big
Yeah.
relief. So,
And we try not to be preachy about it. I run our social media. When it comes down to the things that we put out there, in the social sphere is we don't want to be preachy. We don't want to say, well, you need to think this way, you need to feel this way, you need to be this way. It's, hey, these are things that we all deal with. Here's a way. Here's something that we've dealt with, and it's okay if you're dealing with it too.
yeah, that's the I mean, that's pretty essential too, right? Like we all have to find our formula, right? Like what works for us. And because as much as you want to believe all these, I got the 6 steps and all that crap, like at the
Yeah.
end of the day, they're just frameworks. And I don't even want to trash them. I want to learn from them.
No, not at all.
But at the same
No.
time, like I got to learn from them as I engineer and architect my own. Like what of all these things I learn or see or work for other people, what how does my formula look, right?
No, I think that's really important. Kind of the way you phrase that, because you're right. So yeah, I guess I should have prefaced it. It's not that that's bad. That's just how I have found, or how we've really found to be able to connect with the community
Yeah,
is through is through experience rather than you know think this way or try this technique or I don't know if I'm characterizing it very well, but I think we're on the same page. Is
yeah, yeah.
everyone, as long as you're connecting genuinely with the world, then you're doing fine in whatever way is genuine to you.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to the point to maybe round it out here is like, I tell people like, look, I can give you advice, I can tell you what works for me, and I can tell you some things I've seen work. I'm not saying it's going to work for you though. You've got to take that and do what you can with it and go from there. I mean, what worked for me might not work for you, just
Exactly.
someone giving you all the answers, right? I think that the true fulfillment and the true answer is going to be found within, and yeah, have awareness and open your mind up to these other options or possibilities, perspectives, etc. But take them in and mold them into your own, and let them serve you. Find what serves you. Yeah. So.
Yeah, exactly, brother.
With
Exactly.
with regard to one thing I want to hit on before we wrap up here is the what would you tell the men out there, right? You're a hardened Army retiree at this point, right? Like
Mhm.
the stigma to not do yoga as a man. Like what's your answer to the guys out there? Like, man, I'm not. that's not for me. It's, it's girly. It's this, it's that. Like, what's the checkpoint to kind of let these guys know?
I mean, the way I look at it, at the end of the day, like I'm never going to be able to force someone into the yoga studio, nor would I ever want to. If you're not ready to hop in, then you're not gonna have a good time. I've seen or I've heard of people trying to drag their significant other in, and they get them in the studio even though they didn't want to go, and they say it was okay, whatever, and they don't try it again. So you have to be ready for it, and really, it's what it comes down to is what are you willing to live with? Are you willing to live um, with really bad anxiety, depression, physical pain that could be relieved a little bit, maybe a lot bit if you try yoga? Like, is it worth it to you to take that risk? And because it is a risk, you're putting yourself, not a physical risk, but you're putting yourself risk emotionally, because you could be opening up some stuff that you may not be ready for. But just like I always say, that it's not just the yoga, it's also the counseling and the physical therapy, and how you eat and sleep and all, the whole picture. But if you are at a place where your body and your mind need it, and you really have nothing to lose, because all that your mental health deserves is everything that you have to give it, because in the end, like, that's who you are.
Yeah, no, I love it, and that's it, right? Like we talked about earlier, it's just another tool that you could add to your tool belt, if it
100%.
fits for you. So,
And if you never do yoga, perfectly fine, but maybe if you take a step towards digging inside, change your life.
yeah, 100%.
That's amazing.
So, with regard to that, how can people find you online and look up you and or American Yogi?
Yeah, so probably our biggest presence is on Instagram right now, at Live American Yogi. We're also on Facebook, and then we are our website at liveamericanyogi.com. Those are the easiest ways to reach out. We have a newsletter on the website. You get to see whenever we have, whether it's a retreat coming, or we sell mats that are made in India. Those things sell out in like an hour, so people get onto our newsletter so they can see when things like that are releasing. Otherwise, quickest way, just drop me a line on Instagram, Live American Yogi, and I'm more than happy to answer whatever follow on questions people might have about yoga
Yeah,
or
man. Yeah,
life.
it's awesome, man. And this is exactly what I wanted to go through. It's like, it's a real thing. It's a tool. It's acceptable. No need to, not check your ego on it and check it out, man. So I appreciate and honor you for coming on and sharing your story and experience. And as always, it'll serve someone out there that this might help them out a lot.
No, thank you, brothers. It's an absolute honor to have the talk with you, and to be able to have a voice in the community. And if one person is saved or changed or affected by this, and I think we did all right.
Yeah, 100%, man. All right. Well, hey, Phil Sussman, check him out at Live American Yogi on all the socials and online. And Phil, man, thanks again.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.